In this video, I am going to discuss about that element of cost. Now, I will explain about that meaning of cost and definitions of cost. Cost means it is the price of the product. Another meaning of the cost is to expenditure incurred on producing the goods and services. It represents the sacrifice for going or releasing something of the value. So, for example, you will spend the money for making one product means that is called as a cost. For example, the cost of making a chair. You will make a one chair means that time you will spend the money for materials like a timber, polish, wages paid to carpenter. So these are all the expenditure incurred for making a chair. That is called as a cost. Okay. Now I will explain about that definitions of cost. According to ICMA London, cost is the amount of expenditure incurred on a given things. So, one example for the definitions, in manufacturing of the automobiles, the expenditure incurred on its spare parts, painting and finishing and designing, etc. So you will spend the money for that automobiles manufacturing product. So that time you got the one finished goods. You will spend the money for material. That time only that goods converted into finished goods. So you will incur for a money for the spare parts, painting, finishing the design, etc. So it is called as a cost. Now I will explain about that element of cost. The total cost of the product is composed of the three elements. First one is material, second one is labor, and third one is expenses. Each of these elements may be further divided into two categories: direct material and indirect material. So now first of all I will explain about that what you mean by direct material and what do you mean by indirect material. First I will explain about the direct cost. Direct cost are direct expenses. What do you mean by direct cost? Direct cost are those costs which can be identified with and allocated directly to a particular product or process or job. These costs are also known as a prime cost. All direct expenditure is called as a prime cost. So now I will explain about that indirect cost. What do you mean by indirect cost? Indirect costs are those costs which cannot be allocated but can be apportioned to or absorbed by a particular product or process or job. These costs are also known as a overhead. So all direct expenditure is called as a prime cost. All indirect and indirect expenses is called as an overhead. Okay. Now we will discuss about that material. What do you mean by material? Material means the substance from which the product are made are known as a material. They can be subdivided into two categories: direct material, indirect material. Direct material means direct material or those material which form a part of finished product. These material costs can be conveniently identified with allocated to a particular product or job. It's a part of prime cost. Okay. For example, timber in a furniture making, cloths in a dress making, leathers in a shoe making, bricks in a building a house. So you will produce a one finished goods mean that times you need a raw material. That material is also called as a direct material. Okay. Now I will explain about that indirect material. Indirect material are those material which do not form a part of finished product. Cost of indirect material cannot be identified with the allocated but can be apportioned to a particular product or process or job. For example, you will use the cotton waste for a manufacturing process. You will use a lubricant oil, grease. These are all the one of the indirect material. It is not used for a direct one for a finished product. It will be used for a indirectly for the production. You will use the small tools. You will tight the machine. That time you will use the small tools. So it is not directly involved in the production but indirectly involved in the production. So it is under the head of indirect material. Now I will explain about that labor cost or labor expenses. The labor means for conversion of raw material into finished goods that human effort is needed. Such human effort is called as a labor. So labor can be direct as well as indirect. So direct labor means direct labor is that labor which is directly engaged in the production of the goods or services. The wages of such labor are known as direct wages. So, for example, wages of spinners and weavers in a textile factory. So, that time wages, one concern, they will provide a wages for the spinners, weavers. Those are all labor directly involved in the production. So that type of wages is called as a direct wages. That type of expenses is also called as a direct labor. Okay. Now I will explain about that indirect labor. Indirect labor is that labor which is not directly engaged in the production of the goods and service. Those labors is not directly engaged. So who are directly engaged means that type of labor, direct labor. Who are not engaged in the production is not directly means that type of labor is called as an indirect labor. For example, wages of mechanic, supervisor, watchman, sweeper, timekeeper, etc. Those person cannot be involved indirectly in a production. So those members only indirectly involved in the production. So that type of labor is called as an indirect labor. Now I will explain about that direct expenses. All expenses that are directly charged to the production. What are the expenditure incurred for directly for the production means that type of expenditure is called as a direct expenses. So for the example of the direct expenses is excise duty, royalty of the production, cost of special drawings and designs, etc. So what do you mean by indirect expenses? Expenses that are not directly charged to the productions are indirect expenses. So what are all the expenditure indirectly incurred for the production means that type of expenditure is called as an indirect expenses. So all direct expenditure come under the prime cost. All indirect expenditure is also called as an overhead. So this is the element of cost.